Welcome. Thank you for joining us for the Honors Thesis Workshop. I'm Jody Vaisman, and I'm the Director of the Honors Program.
And I'm Professor David Rosenberg. I'm the Director of the Honors Committee. Technically, it's called the Committee on Undergraduate Honors, which supervises and ultimately approves the honors theses. And I'm also a professor in the law department.
We want to talk a little bit about why you want to take on a big project, why we encourage you to take on a big project, why it's so important to your education, giving you an overview of the nuts and bolts, like the guidelines and what a proposal sort of looks like, and some tips for success, including how to find a faculty member to work with, and let you ask your questions. Sound like a plan? So we encourage you to take on a big project. Typically, it's a large paper, a thesis, but it could also be a thesis alternative, a creative project, a business plan. If you're writing your book or working on a piece of software or a big math problem, there's lots of opportunities in all the different disciplines to really follow a passion or an interest of yours. An example I like to use is a student who is Muslim, who was interested in interest-free lending in the Muslim world. And so he wrote a large paper, became an expert in it, got lots of grad school offers and great work because of it. So it's an opportunity for you to work independently when you get to really direct what you want to learn about. You'll really be an expert on a small topic, and it's very important when you apply to grad school. You'll not only have sample writing that you can use, but you'll also have a great relationship with your individual faculty mentor, someone who can write recommendation letters with you. You have something concrete to show at the end of it. You can impress employers, your family members, and you will graduate with honors within your discipline. So if you wrote it in economics, your diploma would say disciplinary honors in economics if it's approved by the thesis committee, which is generally, if it's considered A work, that they would approve it. And you would compete for the Cantor Prize for Outstanding Thesis, which actually has a cash prize attached to it. Lots of great reasons. As David is fond of saying, you're really getting your bang for your buck with your education when you take on a thesis.
I guess I should elaborate on that. When you write an honors thesis, you spend a lot of one-on-one time with a faculty member in a way that you would never in a regular class. Typically, students meet with them once or twice a week, and often during non-COVID times in the professor's office, or maybe down at Gregory's Coffee, as I sometimes did when I mentored an honors thesis. And you really get to benefit from the expertise of a professor in a way that you couldn't possibly, even in a small class, even if you were to go to office hours every week. You develop a really close relationship and really, can get someone who can guide you really on your thesis and then throughout your career. So it's really to boost the degree that you get from Baruch by having departmental honors because you're a Macaulay student or a Baruch scholar. It's still another great thing to have on your resume.
Plus all the research skills you're getting, right? We live in the information age. Being able to identify quality information, producing your own knowledge is a really exciting time. As I mentioned, it's typically a big paper or a big project. Usually it's done in an area in which you have some expertise, so either within your major or your minor. It's about a one-year process. In my little graphic here, it's 3 semesters, because before you start, you put together a proposal, which we call a prospectus, and helpful faculty like David here and his committee will review it just to make sure it's a workable project, just to try to help you make sure you have all your resources, that the project is small enough so that it's actually doable. And in that prospectus, you're going to have basically sort of your topic and an overview, a short bibliography of things you might read that would be important to it, and some sort of description of your methods. Are you going to be doing a survey? Are you going to be reading and looking at archives and doing document analysis, interviewing people, and have some sort of rationale for your study, why it's important. So here you can see sort of that process. You would get, for those of you who are honors, I see some names I recognize, it would be in your discipline. So for example, if it was English or economics, it ends up serving as 2 honors courses, English 6001 and 6002. If any of you are natural science, some students actually even do a 3rd semester of writing the thesis, which makes sense if you're working in a lab, you get that additional credit there.
It need not be in your major, though, which is something that I think not everyone realizes. You can write an honors thesis in a subject that is not your major, as long as you've taken 2,000-3,000 level courses in that subject and have at least a 3.5 GPA in that subject, as well as a 3.5 GPA overall.
Great. And it's also a chance to draw on maybe connecting your major and minor. An example of a student, he was a finance major minoring in history, and he did an archival study of B.F. Goodrich to look at how and why they decided to invest in rubber at that time period.
It often comes out of, it often comes out of term papers that students wrote, or, just things that they encountered in a class that they took. But it really can be anything at all that is of interest to you, that you've studied as an undergrad in a subject that you have the basic courses in.
Dave, you want to tell them, what are you looking for in a proposal?
Yeah. Most of the time the student has a really good background in the subject that they're proposing, and have already taken several classes in it and thought about it, and usually have enthusiasm about the subject. It can be anything that is sort of goes beyond being a serious term paper, and explores something that really hasn't been written about or studied fully in any academic discipline. The idea is not just to rehash what's already out there and sort of summarize, as you might do, in sort of a decent term paper, but really to discover something new, to break new ground, to make a contribution beyond what's already there. And typically what a student does is spend, I would say, a couple of days, several hours exploring a subject, and then finding a mentor who is usually someone but not necessarily. It can be someone who a professor referred you to, and who is enthusiastic about the subject and is willing to be your mentor and work with you throughout the year. And with their guidance, you put together a proposal, which we call a prospectus, which is like 2 or 3 pages, which 2 or 3 pages, single-spaced usually. It can be pretty long, which kind of outlines the question that you're pursuing, the problem that you're trying to solve, the methods that you intend to use, and that varies a lot from one discipline to another once it's done. But the prospectus just kind of lays out what you're interested in, what you plan on pursuing, your methods, and sort of tentatively what conclusions you might come to. It should include a bibliography. And of course, often the final project is not all that similar to what was put in the prospectus, but the prospectus is the good sort of jumping off point. And that's why we take it pretty seriously. And often the first response that we have is, this looks really interesting, but it needs to be much more focused, because students somehow instinctively kind of want to bite off a really big subject. And we, along with their mentor, try to focus it, because a student will say, I'm really interested in the rise of fascism in the 1930s. I want to write about that. And then they end up writing about, one specific fascist thinker during 2 years in the 1930s, and that person's effect on other thinkers, or influence on other thinkers. So So it can, begin pretty general, but usually gets more focused. Your mentor approves it. The chairman of the department then has to approve it. And then it just comes to our committee. And I would say most of the time, probably 75% of the time, we approve them. Sometimes we ask for revisions. And then the following semester, the student begins.
Great. And I encourage you not to be intimidated by this idea that you're contributing something new. Can, like David said, just be a small part. And for example, in economics, replicating a study, but maybe with a different population or at a different time, now that you're living in the future, is still contributing to the field. So along the lines of helping you narrow down what it is you want to do, I thought we could start with an example. One is the origins of the Glass-Steagall Act. And somebody was looking at early versions and drafts of it and how it changed over time to analyze why lawmakers supported it. And it was important to economic history and policymakers today. And there are benefits to that. There are some very specific, natural sciences have very specific formats that you would work with. As David said, if you're working with natural science, probably you're working in a lab and it's going to be a piece of a study that that the faculty member is already working on. So a lot of this will already be predetermined for you. We also wanted to just share some tips and resources for you. There are lots of helpful things, and we'll be putting some of these in the chat and emailing you at the end of this. But there are very comprehensive thesis guidelines, and that's where you can find the prospectus form. It's basically a 2-page proposal, again, with the bibliography, but it is probably a very challenging 2 pages to write, because at that point you should at least have a little bit more of a focus on your
I would say that students have usually spent many hours. I don't know, I would say a couple hours a day for a week or 2 weeks putting it together, possibly more than that, because it's helpful. It's really the way you get started, and in order to get started doing your research, you really need to build the groundwork. And so the prospectus is a pretty serious document.
And it's your roadmap for success. So this is your chance to get some faculty feedback on that. We also at Baruch have a research librarian. So if you need your piece, you need to get your hands on an article or some data set, we have somebody to help you with that at the library. And the Writing Center, you can specifically request thesis appointments. So there you'll be assigned a writing consultant who can help with that genre of research. And there's an ebook which I recommend, and Emily's going to put that in the chat. It's called How to Write a BA Thesis, a practical guide from your first ideas to your finished paper. If you're just thinking about it, this is a great book to get you started in terms of the scope of that. And lastly, I'd like to mention that the honors program has a support system called the Inquiry Scholar Program, which is working with the director of honors, that is me, to help you in the initial stages, narrowing down your topic, helping you find a faculty member, answering your questions, just sort of being a general resource. David is very helpful as well, but I can give you some help as well if you're interested in that. There's a link as well.
This is really the crucial step to get started, because you're going to spend a year working with the person, and it can sometimes be a little bit difficult finding a mentor, both who knows you and is willing to work with you, but also who is an expert who's qualified in that particular subject. And it's a pretty big school, and there are lots of professors in each department. And the easiest way is if you've already had a professor who is an expert in the subject that you want to write about, who you presumably did reasonably well in their class with, and you already have a rapport with them, and you sort of present to them having done, I would say, quite a bit of research already, your idea. And if they agree, then they help you shape your prospectus. It happens quite frequently that students have a little trouble finding a faculty mentor, and you just have to be willing to, take a look at the faculty profiles in the department that you're interested in and find a person who seems like an expert in that subject and email them. And in my experience, overwhelmingly, professors are really delighted that a student would want to do an honors thesis and would be interested in working with them. But you do have to reach out a lot of the time. And I think that can be a little bit intimidating for some undergrads. But again, I think most of the time the professor is kind of flattered that you would ask them. And it is a lot of work for them, for us, but we always learn a lot and are very satisfied, gratified at the end that we participated in the project, both because the student did a great thing for themselves, but also because we learn a lot along the way. So if you already know who you want to work with, that's great. But if not, that's okay too. You just have to knock on a lot of doors during non-COVID times and send a lot of emails before we get out of this.
Yeah, and take classes with them. If there's a prospective mentor, take the class. You then get to know that faculty member better. Then they know the quality of your work, and it's easier to start up that mentor-mentee relationship.
It does need to be somebody who is a full-time professor at Baruch.
Great. And you could also look outside your major and outside of your school. Sometimes students, there are, for example, the Marx School of Public and International Affairs, there are lawyers and economists and people who work there. So you might be surprised, being a Zicklin student, there might be someone in the School of Liberal Arts who is an econometrician using the sort of approaches that you use. So think broadly too.